Hi, everyone, and welcome to the third event in this Building World-Class Teams series on the importance of feedback. Now, before we kick off, I'd like to get a little bit of housekeeping out of the way first. This webinar is going to be recorded. Captions are available throughout the webinar. If you'd like to enable them, there should be an option on the bottom tab or in the menu by clicking the three dots icon. Chat is open, so feel free to talk to us or amongst yourselves and pop a hello if you'd like. We are moderating it to keep this a safe space, and any inappropriate messages will be removed. If you have any questions for the panelists at any time during the event, make sure to drop it into the Q&A. There'll be an opportunity for the panelists to answer your questions during the event. Uh, with that out of the way, uh, Melissa is gonna kick us off and get us started. Over to you, Melissa.
Great. Thanks so much, Adnan. And hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. For those that don't know us, we are the Honeycomb Works, and our mission is for everyone at work to feel like they belong and are free to invent. We help organizations build inclusive and innovative cultures through behavior change and data, because cultures are created habit by habit, person by person. It's the things that people do on a day-to-day basis or don't do that make someplace safe for everyone to work, to speak up, to share ideas, to challenge, to do brilliant things, and hopefully enjoy themselves while they're actually doing it. So we have a platform. It looks like a honeycomb, hence the name Honeycomb. And it helps individuals develop positive habits and organizations to understand their strengths and biggest areas of risk. The Culture Plus version of the Honeycomb is specifically designed for engineering startups and scale-ups, built with the support and expertise of the Royal Academy of Engineering. So that's who we are. We'd love to learn a little bit more about you. Please feel free to say hi in the chat, but we're also going to pop up a poll so you can let us know what brought you here today. So while you're doing that, I'll share our plan for this session. So we're going to begin with a lightning talk and then move on to our brilliant panel to discuss feedback, why we do it, why it's important, and all that brilliant things. But from folks who are actually putting it into practice. And then we're going to share some ways you can take action immediately and end with your questions. So do use the Q&A function to ask any questions that you have, and you will get a recording. That's why we're recording it, so that you don't have to frantically take notes, and you can replay your favorite bits as often as you like. So we'd love to keep in touch after the event, so please do subscribe. We've got some really exciting events planned for the autumn, which has fully come upon us today, I believe. So please do subscribe, and we will drop a link in the chat as well, so you have it throughout the webinar. So hopefully at some point we'll say something smart enough that makes you want to keep hearing from us. So I'm going to now introduce the team hosting you today. So you've already met Adnan, who is our delivery manager and also our data analyst. He's the person that makes sure we don't try to get away with anything sneaky in terms of our data. He keeps us very honest and helps extract the really rich insights that are going to help us solve this equity and inclusion issue once and for all. And Marin Bird is our research and impact lead. So she is going to do the lightning talk. So you'll be hearing from her shortly. And she asks all the big, tough questions and has an approach to research deeply embedded with empathy and understanding people, and a massive drive for making a difference. And me, I'm Melissa. I'm the founder and CEO of the Honeycomb Works, and I will be monitoring the panel discussion shortly. So we are going to talk feedback today, and that might seem like an interesting topic for startups, scale-ups, maybe not the top of your list, but we like to say we look at feedback as we've been saying it's one of the foundations to actually building a successful startup and scale up. And as a founder myself, I know how busy things are, how intense they get, and how difficult it can be to sort of pause and learn about people's experience and take the time to develop them. But it is foundational. It's the thing that will help you address at the early stages any little cracks that could lead to the chasms that could destroy your business. But it's also foundation to good leadership. If you're not understanding people, if you're not helping them develop, if you're not learning about your own areas to develop and in your impact on people, you're never going to be able to develop as a leader. And you're having a rollicking conversation before we kicked off about why it is that folks in startups don't actually focus on these things. And there's so much of a drive towards getting investment, and all the resources, all the messages are about getting that next round of investment. And obviously, you might need that to stay alive. But what we find is often that can be at the expense of making sure that there is a functional business to invest in. And it's those things that are missed in the early stages that ultimately lead to a crash later on. One organization we were working with, they were doing fantastic, brilliantly cruised into their Series A, and were going for their Series B, but ended up not making it and scaling down because of the cracks in their culture that then turned into chasms. And they did not have the structure to identify and address those things early on. So that's really what we want to help you with today, to make sure that we don't have that happen anymore to any brilliant companies, especially the ones that we've been talking to and who are here to change the world for the better. So enough from me. I'm going to hand it over to Marin, who's going to tell you a little bit more about why feedback and what its impact is. Thanks.
Thanks, Melissa. Hi, folks. Thank you very much for joining us. Yeah, as Melissa said, my name is Marin Bird, and I lead on research and impact at the Honeycomb Works, and I think a lot about feedback as part of that role. So I'm going to, as Melissa said, just share a little bit about why we think it's so important and why it's so impactful in your particular context. But before I do, I'm going to just show you the results of that poll that you took part in just a moment ago. So you should be able to see those kind of percentages pop up there. Really interesting, as you can see, just over 2/3 chose I want to improve feedback across the organization. And I would be lying if I said I'm not delighted that that has come through as a real need for this group, because that is exactly what we're going to try and help you do during today's webinar. And ultimately, it's about thinking through individual behavior and individual habits in order to have that wider impact across an organization where everybody's doing their bit to help with the improving of feedback culture and really embedding that positive foundation, as Melissa said. But yeah, I have lots of ideas around why we should choose feedback and why it's the third topic for our Building World-Class Teams event. But I wanted just to take a moment for you all to reflect on the question itself. Why feedback? I suppose I would ask you to think about what else could you use if it wasn't feedback? How are you going to find out if things are not working? How do you find out what other people think of your work, what other people think of your behavior? I had a little bit of time thinking about this myself in preparation for today, and I couldn't come up with anything else except feedback from other people in whatever way you get that. And then I also wanted you to take a minute to reflect on your own experience of feedback. I think there were some folks in the poll that said they wanted to improve on receiving feedback and on giving feedback. So maybe think about, have you ever received really helpful feedback, and what was helpful or why was it helpful? And then the flip side, I would imagine, unfortunately, we've all had awful experiences of really unhelpful feedback that derailed your thinking or didn't help you progress in any way. Maybe something comes to mind. And if so, maybe reflect on what it was in that instance that was unhelpful. Just maybe you've already come up with some ideas about why feedback for yourself. But just to share now some of ours, I think these three kind of categories or themes are the core ways we want to think about feedback for today's session in the context of building and retaining world-class teams. And the first one is that feedback is an absolutely essential element of innovation, really important in the context you're all in. The second one is maybe a little bit less intuitive, but that feedback is a really important element for retaining your high performers, so that the people you really do need to be retaining. And then that final one is, from our perspective, I just don't understand how you get a really good view of your culture if feedback is not part of that process and the foundational part of the process from our perspective and our process. The first one, so I'll dig into those just for a minute, one by one. So I said that it's the link between feedback and innovation is really important. And I think in order to tease that out a little bit, we need to think about what's needed for innovation. And in order for people to innovate, in order for them to try something new, they have to feel psychologically safe. And all I mean there is they need to feel like it's okay to take a risk. It's okay to get it wrong. It's not going to be the end of the world. It's not going to mean the end of my positive relationship with my colleagues, with my manager, with the folks around me. If folks feel able to take those risks, then they feel psychologically safe. And the way you make people feel psychologically safe, there's many things you can do, but one of the fundamental practices and processes to build psychological safety is embedding a culture of feedback. So both giving and receiving feedback regularly as a normal part of your working day and culture is going to help boost psychological safety, which will help innovation. And then the other thing, I think the really clear link here between feedback and innovation and brilliant collaborative creation is transparency. So if you think about really good innovation and pushing new ideas and trying new things, it really works best when there's diverse perspectives, when there's people throwing in their ideas and bouncing off each other and having really open conversations. And that really only happens if there's a culture of feedback. They are the same thing. But tell me what you think about this, or can I get your thoughts, or can I suggest something? They're all really, really linked and ultimately driving towards innovation, which is going to be crucial for success and for getting to where you need to get to. Now, the second point there, if you remember on the 3 points I had on the screen, the link between feedback and retaining your best performers. Now, this one might not seem as intuitive. It didn't initially for me until I started digging into the research. And just when we talk about best performers, I'm sure we all have something that comes to mind. But in this context, we're thinking these are the folks that really consistently deliver excellent work and equally are brilliant contributors to your culture. So they're the people you really want to keep around and really want to make sure are growing with you. And there was an interesting project looked at the performance reviews of almost 24,000 people, and it looked at what type of feedback they receive and also how often they receive that feedback. And this group, those high performers, get more feedback than other people. So 1.5, like 1.5 times the amount of other people. But, and this was really interesting to me, they get really low quality feedback. And this is something I'm going to talk about a bit more, but the idea of low quality feedback is feedback that isn't actionable. You don't know what to do afterwards. It's not specific. You don't really know what they're talking about. And it's often full of exaggeration or cliche. And it's really interesting here because it's not someone saying you did an awful job or that was terrible. In fact, in this context, it's the reverse. It's you always do a brilliant job or you never make a mistake there. And it's not good feedback because you can't do anything with it. And it's incredibly demotivating and leads to disengagement with this particular group. And then the final kind of theme I thought was important to consider here is the idea of feedback and really making sure you have a clear view of your culture. So again, when we're talking about world-class teams, we're talking about making sure that people are working well together in an inclusive culture. And I just don't know how you get a clear sense of that unless you have feedback really, really built in. How do people feel? You're going to need to get feedback on that. How are people behaving? That's also going to involve a certain level of feedback. If you're not doing it, then probably you're making assumptions. You might be gathering 1 or 2 perspectives, but it's unlikely you have as clear a view as you need at this stage. You might talk to each other a lot. You might have lots of great conversation, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you are gathering the feedback and the clarity that you do need. And then this other kind of stat I came across that was an interesting reminder, I suppose, of the importance of retaining great people and feedback as an element in that. So people who get low quality feedback are 63% more likely to leave. And again, low quality feedback, you can't do anything with it. You don't really know what it pertains to. And particular groups are more likely to be the receivers of this bad feedback. And those groups are women, and they're also people who are racially minoritized. So it is really important that we kind of get to grips with how to improve our feedback culture. And a couple of examples of where that really plays out. So women get 22% more feedback on their personality. And the reason it's a problem is I don't know what you do with that. Like, you can't improve your career prospects when someone tells you that you're lovely or you're friendly or that you're bossy or whatever those words are. It doesn't really help you get better at your job. And that's supposed to be what feedback helps you with. And there's also often stereotype that kind of creeps into the way people get feedback. So an example of that, Black people are more likely to be called passionate than ambitious. And again, there's subtle kind of messages being shared with folks that lead to this stat. For example, 63% more likely to leave. I said actionable and unactionable a few times. So I think just the difference between those two things an example, perhaps if someone said, I didn't really understand the data you presented in the meeting. Okay, well, it's good to know that, but I'm not sure what I do. Whereas if they said there was too much data, the graphs weren't visually clear, the text was too small, and I don't think the headlines corresponded well with the message you were trying to convey. Okay, I've got 3 things that I can go away and change and improve. So that's the difference there between actionable and feedback that isn't actionable. And then just one more kind of point, I suppose, that hopefully really gets you thinking about why this is so important in your context before we jump into the panel. The first thing I would say, Melissa mentioned that we have a platform that we've developed with the Royal Academy of Engineering called Culture Plus, and it has allowed us to really specifically dig into how folks are doing in particular areas connected to inclusive cultures. And we know from the data we've been gathering via that platform that feedback is an area that needs development. And it's both asking for feedback and giving feedback is really clearly coming through as an area that isn't a strength. And also it is crucial, very crucial to your long-term success as startups in engineering because of all of the points I've shared previously. And here's a snapshot of that data. I'll just take you through it very, very briefly. So as I said, Culture Plus allows us to present aggregate data for all of the organizations who are engineering startups and currently active. And just to note, I have slightly truncated that scale just to make it more visually easier to read, I suppose, on the slide that I'm sharing. But the point here is, of those areas that you can see listed, the various different focus areas, valuing feedback at the bottom is the lowest area. So it gets the lowest scores from colleagues and peers, and it also gets the lowest scores from managers. So again, another reason for that why feedback. As part of this series, we wanted to address the area that needs development. And I mentioned that we know it's both asking for feedback and giving feedback. And here's a tiny bit more detail around that. So the specific behaviors, we also gather data around how folks are behaving in engineering startups and scale-ups. And the lowest scoring behaviors across all organizations in the aggregate are these 2 you see on the screen. So colleagues are saying people are not asking for feedback when they should, 22% of the time. And managers are saying people are not giving specific feedback when they should, 19% of the time. So quite a substantial amount of missed opportunities there, I suppose, particularly when we think about how essential it is for innovation, for best possible work practices, even just for making sure your colleagues know what's going on and know how you feel. So hopefully you're keen to start improving these things and start thinking about how you can put some of this knowledge into action and into shifting some of these particular concerns if they're a problem for you. And Melissa's going to share a bit more in a little while, but just to very briefly share some of the resources that we are going to give you post today's webinar. And this, for example, is a habit card, and it just allows you and your team or a group of people you're working with to set some structures in place to really think about embedding the behaviors. In this case, I asked for feedback, maybe a challenge to see who gets to tick off those 4 actions first. And then also the same thing again for I give specific feedback. So again, you have the one behavior that's very clear for everybody, and then an opportunity to work through it together as a team. But with that, I'm going to pass back over to Melissa, who will share a little bit more and then intro to the panel. Thanks, Melissa.
Thanks, Marin. Very briefly, before we go over to the panel, I did want to let everyone know that you will be getting access to the habit cards, as Marin said, in a follow-up email. The 2 that Marin shared, and then a couple more to help you put these behaviors into practice. But if you're interested in accessing a whole honeycomb full of habit cards, then they are in Culture Plus, and you can learn more about that in the next group demo, which is coming up in early October. If you can't wait, you can always get in touch and we'll do a one-to-one. But the sign up link will also pop in the chat. But now, without further ado, let's move over to our panel discussion. So we're going to bring back Marin, which I'm sure you'll all be very, very happy to hear, and also introduce Brian and James to the panel as well. So if you have been on our previous two Building World-Class Teams events, you will have met them before. But for those of you who have not, James is the Vice President of Operations and Product Owner at MFX, a company who's doing amazing things with cell gene therapy and is going to save all of our lives eventually, someday. And James is also, in addition to being a brilliant innovator and heading up operations and doing all these other wonderful things in engineering, he's also somebody that cares very deeply about culture and the people in his organization, and has done amazing work to make sure that MFX is a fabulous place to work. So that's James. And we also have Brian, who I've been collaborating with for a number of years, and is just an absolutely brilliant leadership coach and support startups and scale-ups as a fractional HR leader, and always makes me think new, interesting things about leaderships and startups, and has just tremendous insights from all of the folks that he speaks to. That's my very short introduction to James and Brian and Marin. If you'd like to add anything before we touch on your first question, please do feel free to add any details, anything else you want us to know about you. But Brian, we'll start with you. And the first question is one of the things that we often hear from leaders in startups, and which is, we're a small team. We just talk to each other. We don't need a structured process. We don't need to formalize this. We just have conversations. What's your response when you hear that?
You're missing out on an awful lot, I think, if that's the approach. And Marin gave a really nice introduction to the breadth of elements within a company that are either facilitated or hampered by feedback. And I think a lot of founders, a lot of early stage entrepreneurs, early stage company people have a bit of a misconception from the management side. They don't fully understand that their primary role is to help the people who they manage, to help those people get better and be better. And it leads to, I think it just leads to a tremendous over dramatization of something like feedback. And people tend to think of it's this big corporate thing, and there has to be a huge process, and we're going to go and we're going to have evaluation sheets and scoring, and it's going to be tied to performance and compensation and career paths and all of this stuff. And it turns into a huge opera, when in reality, if I'm a manager, my job, my really only responsibility is making my team as successful as it can be, as individuals and as a team. And that means I need to have a relationship with each individual individually and then collectively as a team. And feedback is simply a form of communication. It's simply a form of figuring out what's going on and how am I doing? How are you doing? How are we doing? What's actually happening? And Marin raised some really, really good points here. How are you supposed to actually figure out things like these existential questions of whether we're succeeding or not if you don't talk about how things are going? You talk about innovation, you talk about teamwork, you talk about all the things that startups are really, really concerned about. And it all comes down to, is my job as a manager primarily engaged in getting people to actually work well together and work at their best? And if we're not talking to each other about things, if I'm not sharing positive feedback, if I'm not sharing negative feedback, if I'm not sharing just questioning feedback as in what's going on, if I'm not doing all that as a manager to my team, what am I doing? What am I involved in? So if it's casual, if it's, well, we just have chats, we just go for a walk and I say things, that really doesn't cut it past a certain point. If you're just a few people sitting around one table, sure, I get it. Maybe that's all you do. But once the circle starts to enlarge and you have more people and more challenging problems and things need more actual leadership, you have to figure out what your principles are and what your behaviors are around feedback and around these relationship issues. And this is just a commercial for Honeycomb then. I mean, this is why having a structure is so important, and having a tool is really, really necessary. That's my answer.
Yeah, so I appreciate the commercial. But also I think, and yes, everybody should use the Honeycomb. But if you don't have it yet, I appreciate that point of like it's one thing to say, hey, how are you doing? And another thing to ask a specific question. I'm thinking about just like we recently did our internal belonging survey, and though we scored very high, there was one area that we dug into a bit more because it was lower than everything else. And we found that people didn't want to waste other people's time by asking questions in meetings. And actually based on that, we had a meeting, and I said, any questions? And there were no questions. And normally I would have been like, cool, I explained it perfectly. But I was like, actually, I'm smart, but I'm not that smart. So there has to be something that somebody has either a question or comment or give me some feedback on how you're thinking about this thing that I just rolled out. And again, it's just adding in that little hiccup, right? That little just point to pause and ask a specific question. Because for the most part, especially if you're doing a fairly good job with your team, you ask people and be like, yeah, it's fine. And then you find out they're burning out or they're struggling with one particular relationship in the organization, whatever it is, like, even though they feel really positively, something's not working. So it is about making sure you're adding in those specific questions so that you can get people from beyond their initial reaction of, yeah, relatively speaking, everything's fine. Which brings us nicely, I think, over to James and the question of when do you start and how do you start?
I think, well, from my experience, we started right at the beginning. So when MFX was founded, initially there was 3 of us, and we started at the beginning. And I think, touching on your point, both Melissa and Brian, about you can have chats, and that's fine, but that's not the same as feedback in my eyes, because it really deserves its own time and attention. And when you're really intentional with it, it helps to embed it within the organization. And for us, that meant that we could craft something at an earlier stage, which we could then, evolve as the organization has grown. So, we still have core elements of our approach and philosophy towards feedback, which is everyone gets coaching on how to give and receive feedback. Everyone is asked to be a generous giver of feedback and a respectful receiver and grateful receiver of that feedback as well. And also really distilling the essence of feedback, which is focusing on the task or the thing that's specific rather than making it about the person. And that really helps, especially for you giving the feedback, to ensure that you don't feel some level of discomfort and you can really get the point across. But also the person receiving that feedback also doesn't necessarily make it personal, because, we're talking about this particular presentation, we're talking about this particular prototype, it's not about that person. And I think the other thing that's been really important for us is structure. So to Brian's point and to Melissa's point, structure is really, really important. So whether that be how you do it or how often you do it. So for instance, we have a feedback week roughly every 6 to 7 weeks. And in that time, everyone's expected to have feedback with people who are within the kind of sphere of people they're working with on a regular basis. So that allows people, knowing that we're entering into that week, to have that mindset and that kind of focus around feedback. And not to make it a plug, but we do use Culture Plus. And I think the beauty of Culture Plus is it's a different modality that you can use to have what might be slightly more difficult conversations with people. And that could be because of cultural barriers, that could be because of hierarchical barriers that sometimes just aren't avoidable. So having the Culture Plus platform there gives you that anonymized way of being able to give that person that feedback. And, you know, as scientists and engineers, we do like data. So you get the metrics in front of you so you can really look at how you are performing for yourself. So you can see previous scores and your present scores and see, you know, have I improved on this particular behavior? But what I also value about a platform like Culture Plus is that it allows you to be able to sit with the data and sit with the information and really dissect it in your own time, which is very different to when someone's having that one-to-one conversation because your mind is doing so much. And when you do that, you have, you know, two potential ways of processing that feedback, which is either you can be a sponge and basically take everything in and be like, I am this, I'm not this, etc., etc., or you can be like a sieve or a strainer and really filter that information properly and be like, okay, why is this being said? Do I agree with it? Because you are allowed to disagree with feedback, right? We're not always capable of filtering who, how, when we get the feedback, but it's definitely up to us what we do with that feedback. So I think for me, having something like Culture Plus allows you to be a bit more discerning and control what you do take in from the feedback. And the last thing I'll add is being clear on the different types of feedback and having that nuance. So is it coaching feedback? Is it evaluative feedback? Is it appreciation feedback? You can have all of those in one session, but it's really important to give them their own space so that the person can take each piece of information properly. And that's really important because clarity is kindness, you know, being clear is being kind. And I think that's really important, especially to Marin's point about actionable feedback. When you're clear and you really distill the essence of what you're trying to give to someone, that is actually very, very helpful.
Such important points there, James. And I think, you know, some of the things that we intuitively think are the right or kind or empathetic things to do, like couching our feedback or saying, you know, maybe this, or think maybe this, or not using the word you, but, you know, like we think that's being kind, but actually that's just giving that person a chance to not understand it or not really be clear that I was giving that feedback. And I think the same thing with giving somebody feedback face to face, a lot of people are uncomfortable. And I know the first time I sat down to write and send feedback, I spent hours on it because I was like, this person is going to interpret. I said hours, it was days. And because this person is going to be interpreting this without me there to make sure that they're okay and on the journey. And you know, and again, it's one of those things that you sort of get better and better at as you and more comfortable with as you do it. But it is actually much easier for somebody then to process that and not have that fight or flight kind of instinct, right? And I love what you said about really making sure that you're clear about this is not who you are. This is not about you as a person. And that's why we often talk in the language of habits, right? Because it's like, hey, here's something that you're doing. Here's a new habit that you could do that would actually lead to positive outcomes. And it's something that everybody can think about in terms of, I'm going to add a new positive habit, which is much better than I'm a terrible person and everybody hates me. Which, as we had a great comment in the chat from somebody who said they they worked somewhere where they didn't have any feedback whatsoever, and which led them to getting imposter syndrome. And I don't know why our brains are like this, where we'll fill in the gap with the worst case scenario rather than the best case scenario. But I think it just goes to show how even in the absence is worse than negative feedback even. So Marin, we're gonna go over to you and ask what tips specifically you would give a founder or a leader to give good feedback. Obviously, we've heard some already, but what else would you add?
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. To be honest, I think I'm just going to be building on the advice that James and Brian have shared, because there was a lot in there that I think is absolutely fantastic. I think the actionable, of course, if you're giving somebody a piece of feedback, you need to be able to you need to know what they could do with it. So is there some action that they can take as a result of the feedback as a leader or founder, particularly because that is your role, as Brian was saying. Timely as well. I think there's a real issue with recency bias. So if you're only giving feedback once a month, you're probably giving feedback on the last 3 days. It's unlikely you have the capacity to remember or to have really meticulous note taking. So really thinking about embedding it as a regular kind of almost commonplace. I love, Brian said, not a huge opera. It's not a huge thing that has to be, really a big mark in your calendar for when it happens. It becomes a regular piece of the way you work, and that's going to improve the quality of it. And just as well to think about, if you're not already convinced about that idea of it doesn't have to be face to face, there's a couple more reasons why it's really helpful to think about feedback, writing it down, sharing it with somebody, giving them a chance to reflect on it. I think the argument people often make, which you alluded to, Melissa, for face-to-face feedback is that you can adapt and you can be very responsive to the person in front of you, and you can deliver your feedback in a particular way, which is absolutely appropriate in some contexts and should be adopted in some contexts. But the problem is you're going to be responding to people differently, and it's all just such an opportunity for a really biased appraisal or feedback process to creep in. Because if you're talking to your friend and you see that they're a little bit upset, you're going to respond differently to if you're talking to somebody who doesn't show they're upset in the same way, or who you don't know that well. So you can't really read that they're upset. So it's a really subtle way that you won't be able to treat people in the same way. Whereas if you do write down your feedback, you have to justify it. You have to think about, okay, as Melissa said, they're going to read this. So if I say, listen, your work on data wasn't very strong, here's my example. Or if I say, you did a fantastic job on presenting with that client because of that meeting we had on Monday, it's a much better practice, a much better process. And the other thing I was thinking as James was speaking, which I loved, was that it's a skill. I don't know many people who are good at this without practicing it. Quite difficult. Like, I'm sure many of us in any context, giving somebody feedback that they might not want to hear is really difficult, and it's a really hard thing to do, and you're probably going to do it quite badly the first few times or until you improve. So it's something that ironically you need to get feedback on, and you need to acknowledge that it's a muscle, a skill, a practice that none of us are born good at, or if we are, I haven't met them. So yeah, just a few thoughts that I had around building better quality, actionable, specific, timely, and based in evidence always, I think.
I love that. Not to get too meta or Inception-like, but whenever you give feedback, was that helpful? Get your feedback on your feedback. But yeah, it's a good tip. Because I think you do need to hear from people whether or not what you actually said is actionable and is useful. And it's one of those things also, in the moment, it might not feel that way, but if they have time to process and digest and come back and reflect, then it might well be after. I'm going to come back to Brian, because I know you've worked with a lot of startup founders and leadership teams as well, and obviously they have so many things to do. I know this as a founder and the CEO of our startup, that there is a lot going on. So how do you fit this in to everything? And that probably applies not just to founders and leaders, but to everybody at every level in any kind of startup and scale up, right? There's always too much to do and too little time.
Sure.
And really high stakes.
Yes, and I think that the age and stage of the company will help determine what the company can actually accept and use effectively. So if you don't have any real feedback mechanism, then I think it's important to say, to just determine whether you should try to start something that's really formal and it's heavyweight or middleweight or lightweight, or at the very, very least, just start by asking people the two best feedback questions that are appropriate to any situation. How was that for you? What was the most important thing? What was the best thing about this for you? And what would have made it better for you? And if you start with that sense of just that sense of curiosity about things, whether it's a meeting with the sales team, or a meeting with the prospect, or an internal engineering meeting, or some sort of collaborative effort between 2 or 3 different groups, and you pull someone aside after the meeting and you ask them, and you just start to do it. Start to ask them how they perceive things. Because getting back to Murin's opening point, we don't really know what's going on because of our own perceptions and our own narrowness and the human condition. So we have to talk about these things. We have to find out other perspectives. And that can lead to, especially if you're the founder, if you're someone in power, that can lead to simply more acceptance and a lightweight and kind of an easy way to start talking more about feedback without jumping immediately to a big program. So that, to Murin's point just a minute ago, when she was saying, when you have to give critical feedback to someone, you can ask them these kinds of questions and they'll be a little more used to it. So it's not, we're not jumping from, from 0 to 12 in terms of again, the forms and the process, and everything comes to a halt because we have this big heavy thing. But the real decision for busy anybody in a startup is, do you value this? And if you value it, you will find a way to start small and work your way up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that once you start doing it, you'll see the transformative aspect of it. And I think and see the things that, I mean, early on in our experience, things are not moving along, or the culture wasn't quite where I needed it to be. So I asked for some feedback, and I got a very specific behavior to change that really shifted things suddenly. So, it really does have an impact. And, I think you've used the phrase organizational debt in the past to talk about like how, if you don't do this over time, it just gets tougher and tougher to address it.
Melissa, I'll say very quickly about that. I mean, if you want to see what your organization, what your team is going to look like in the future, look at it right now. Because the things that you value, even if you're not super sophisticated, even if it's not formally structured, even if it's not, if it's not 10 out of 10, the values you have, the things you pay attention to, and the principles and the themes of those values are evident right now in the group. And if you want a preview of how things are going to be in the future, just look at now, because if you're growing at any pace and at any scale, the things that you're doing and not doing today will probably be in evidence at some point in the future that you're the point in the future that you're looking towards. So if you want a sneak preview, just look at it right now. And if you're not doing these things, this is how the organizational debt, these broken promises, this lack of fairness and consistency, this over informality and overly casual way of managing and leading people, that's what causes all of this in the future. So then when the organization really has a problem and you need to rely on people and call in their goodwill, there is no goodwill, there's just debt. And that's what you're trying to avoid as a manager and a founder and a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to James now to talk about new people. And actually we had a question come in that links to this as well. So, when somebody comes in new, how do you give them valuable feedback? And we had a question from the audience on how much minimum time in an organization or in a position do you suggest is required before you give feedback or take feedback from them? So how long until you can actually help people with feedback, and how do you give them feedback that helps align on expectations?
I'm always a supportive ambassador of the earlier the better, because I think we can see so many things at the beginning. And if you think about it from a perspective of someone coming in, there needs to be that alignment of their job description that they had, the person that you saw at the interview, and now you're bringing that together. So I think for instance, within 6 weeks for us, someone would have had a feedback session, certainly with their manager, maybe with 1 or 2 people, and then maybe more as it grows. So for us, it starts really early. And part of that is because I think for me, 2 of our values, we have more than 2, but 2 of our values are being supportive of the person. And that's the whole person, not just the team member or employee. So it's thinking about the person in their entirety. The other one is accountability. And with both of those, with both of those values, I think what's really important is communication and open, regular feedback. So upon joining, everyone gets our feedback guidelines, which is a really simple 4-step process, which is in one slide, and it's very, very simple, and it outlines it. There's many, I'm not going to prescribe anything to anyone, but there's many that you can research and see what works best for you and your organization. But I think have something. And so everyone gets that feedback guidelines, and then we have a conversation as to why feedback is important, and it goes to a lot of the points that Miriam discussed at the beginning. It's important for innovation. If you come in, we've brought you in because we value whatever it is that you're bringing to the organization. If you don't tell us why we might have a blind spot, then actually we're losing out on the value that you could be bringing. There's also a myriad of other things in just how we can help to improve each other that come from the feedback. So we really try to ensure that people understand why feedback is really important to us as an organization. And also, because we're humans and talking about habits, every so often I have a kind of recalibration where I go around and have feedback with everyone just to kind of almost retrain and coach them on how we should be giving and receiving feedback within our organization. It's really making it embedded in the way, as to the points that have been made by Brian and Miriam, it's making it part of the culture. So that is a really important thing. And in terms of new people, having those onboarding touch points is really important, so that they, again, as I said, there's that alignment of the job description that they had and the role that they're in, and then being able to have that conversation so you can cultivate a shared understanding as you move together. Because like Miriam said, again, if you're not asking and having those conversations, how do you know what's working or not working? And when you don't do that, it manifests in this sort of like void or resentment, which is not good for you or the company or the team member. And building on Brian's point about not knowing certain things, there's the concept of Johari's window, right? Which is about understanding what you know about yourself, what other people don't know about yourself, things that you don't know about yourself, and things that other people don't know about yourself. So, that kind of classic quadrant. And feedback really helps you with that, because you get that information about these things that you didn't know about yourself. To the person who was in the Q&A who talked about they had not received any information, and there you go, right? You end up with imposter syndrome, whereas you might be actually doing a really important thing, really important and valuable work. And the last thing I'll say is feedback is really important, but I also love the concept of feeding forward. So feeding forward is then having that growth mindset. It's looking to be progressive. It's putting value on what can be done in the future. Because when we talk about feedback, it's always kind of looking in the past, but actually looking in the future is really important, and having that ability to give something that they can work towards, I think, is really important, and making sure that it provides value to the person, because I think all feedback can be very, very valuable. And I think, again, being specific, being actionable, being timely are all really important things to that. But having that kind of growth and progressive mindset as a leader, as a manager, is super important when we talk about feedback, especially to people who are new coming into the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think really importantly, in a startup scale-up space, you might not have a lot of promotion opportunities, but what you can do is ask people what areas they want to develop in, and then give them feedback in those areas and give them some stretch projects and things. But I think that's one of the really helpful things that people can do to that's a great way of thinking about it. Not just I'm giving you feedback on your day-to-day, that everything that's part of your job description, but where do you want to get to? And then I'll give you aspirational feedback as well. So if you want to get to that level, here's how you would have done that differently, or here's what that outcome would have been. And I think it's such a good point. I'm really glad it came through in the question as well, because when you're new, you have no idea how you're doing. And I've talked to so many people, new starters, new in an organization, feeling super vulnerable and getting nothing back. And probationary periods, no idea what's happening. 9 months later, you're doing awesome. Okay, you could have told me that 3 months ago, so I didn't wake up in a cold sweat every night. So yeah, so definitely I think as early as you can, even if it's just after day 2, hey, you did great today. Really appreciated how you spoke up in that meeting, even though you're brand new. That's fantastic. So last moderator question, and then we're going to go to a sort of a recap on some things you can do to put into practice, and then we'll wrap up with audience questions that have come in. But Marin, we've been talking a lot about feedback for development, and it's come up a couple of times. But let's talk about praise. Let's talk about giving employees recognition and how you actually do that.
Absolutely. I'm just going to tag something onto what James said before I do, because a thought came to me, which is about future focused feedback. And a really easy tip is to ask for advice. So there's a study that looked at when people were given CVs and asked, can you give feedback? They were like, yeah, it's great, this person will get the job. If they were given the same CV and said, can you give them advice? They're trying to look for this job. They said, yeah, they should really bulk up the section about their experience, and that's not very convincing, that bit there. So they got things that they could do. So if you're not getting kind of future focused feedback, maybe just change the word. Can you please give me some advice? A risk, I think, in some contexts that might get a bit patronizing, but if you can avoid that, it might be helpful. Sorry, I just wanted to add that in. So yeah, Melissa, I think the question about making sure your feedback culture isn't purely focused on development is actually really pertinent for the engineering startup context, because we do have some data from Culture Plus around a specific behavior, which is about giving public praise to people for their good work and ideas. And it seems that folks find that very, very difficult. Doesn't seem to be something that's a strength or an ease. And I think it's I think most of us actually, when we think about feedback, even in the models and the measurable and, the kind of pushing towards something improving is usually what's in our mind. But I think the thing not to lose is the benefit of really regular positive feedback and praise, because it links to recognition. Of course, it's a really great way to keep those fantastic people that you spent a lot of energy and time getting on board. It's also really beneficial, not just for the person who hears it. So if you do it publicly, it has an impact on everyone. It actually brings everyone's performance up, particularly people whose performance is not very good to begin with. So it actually is a great way to help people be better at their jobs, and quite an easy way. You praise somebody publicly and it has this impact. And it has another knock-on effect if you're the CEO or founder. It's really impactful. People say that a quarter of their most memorable experiences of recognition come directly from CEO and founder. So it's worth building it into your practice, even if these aren't folks that you're kind of directly managing or responsible for. So yeah, I think it's maybe a little bit more uncomfortable for some of us than giving developmental feedback. You have to practice this, and it follows the same rules. It has to be specific. It has to be timely. It should be directly linked to something that this person has done that you've observed, in order to make sure it is actually landing as helpful feedback. So not about their personality, not about stereotypes connected to who they are, but something they've done that is excellent, that you can evidence and say it out loud. Do it via Cheer-a-Peer if you need to. You can set up a structure to prompt it if it's not coming easily, but it's really worth spending time on.
Yeah, we had to set up a Cheer-a-Peer structure to make sure that we did it, and we're the experts, so do set up a structure. But I want to jump down to just a couple of things that we're gonna give you post the workshop, so that'll help you put these behaviors into practice. So Marin referenced the habit cards, and in your follow-up email, you will be getting the ask for feedback card. And one of my favorite one on this is ask someone you haven't usually asked, and ask them for specific feedback on something. It's a good mental exercise to think, who am I going to all the time, and try to go to someone new. The second one, give some feedback. And we talked about this, ask if it was useful, give space for questions, and don't forget the praise. And if you do grab this one, give it a click, link, download it, and then check them off as you do it over the course of a week, and see how you do, see if it feels new and different, or something that, yeah, I've been doing all the time. We suspect not, based on the data. And the couple of new ones for you as well. One is actively seeking opportunities to learn, because this is about a learning mindset, a growing mindset. It's not just about telling you this or telling you that. So certainly seeking out opportunities to learn. And I know that this can get lost in a startup and scale up when you're in survival mode. You've got so much coming at you, but continuing to develop and grow is is really important. And the last one, asking for help, I know can be really hard. And the responding with interest to views different to my own. This is a really interesting one because in our data, it's where we find the biggest gap in scores in terms of gender. So women are less likely to be listened to when they contradict somebody's point of view. So it's one to think about how you're responding. And this is actually one that I had to work on equally to everyone for myself, but because I thought I would understand something and then just run off with it. But what I didn't do was pause and make sure I understood. And that's something that I had to add to my practice because I can get a little excited. So I need to take a moment to make sure that I've understood and not just said, that fits this set of assumptions that I have, so I'm going to assume it's that and then run with it. So have a look at these. And as I mentioned, if you did love these and are hungry for more, you can get access to them in Culture Plus, and you can sign up for the demo or get in touch for the group demo, or get in touch with a one-to-one demo. But we're gonna jump over to, we've got a few minutes left, and we've got a couple of questions. One's a really good one here from the point of view of somebody who received feedback, and we said you can disagree, but they disagreed and were told that it was a sign that they didn't accept feedback. So any thoughts on that?
I do have a thought. I see you on mute at the same time, so I'll keep mine short, Brian, and then you can jump in. I think often, I think if it's good feedback, and I don't mean good in that you agree with it, but if it's specific and observable and actionable, then you can usually have a conversation about it that doesn't, it's not about disagreeing. It's about being really clear. What exactly is it that needs to shift, and why does that need to shift, and what does it look like if it shifts? So you're having that conversation about what the action is and what needs to change. I think it's much more difficult to land on somebody pushing back and saying, well, you're not accepting my feedback, when you can look at it in that level of detail. So I think if folks are giving good quality feedback, it should mean good quality conversation and disagreement, or generative responses to it. More difficult if the feedback is not useful to begin with. Brian, I know you probably had a thought there as well.
Marin, I think the question gets to the competency of the person providing feedback and how good they are at it. So it's not necessarily the quality of the feedback itself, but what's the intention, what's the skill, what's the relationship from the person who presumably is above giving feedback to someone below. And it doesn't always work well, and especially if someone's not very skilled. So sometimes you have to make the calculation of, I'm just not going to worry about it that much. But I understand it's tricky in every situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, well, I'm not gonna add any more to that, but we did have one more question on the SMART principle. So anybody have strong feelings on the SMART principle for giving feedback? Specific, measurable, actionable. We nod, we know what SMART, is. Are we happy with SMART? Do we use SMART?
So I think the answer is you need to use something. And so Marin was talking about practice. This is absolutely something you need to practice. So you either have a tool, you either do your own reading, you talk to people, you learn about this, but this is about relationships, and there are lots and lots of areas to explore. And so I think SMART is fine. I think that if you try SMART and you're doing it with if you're a good faith, making a good faith effort at figuring it out and trying to apply it, terrific. I think that that broadly it might be a little harder to roll out because it's harder to stay consistent with everyone, especially in terms of distance, hybrid work environments and everything else. So you do want, at some point, you want a tool, but the principles of SMART are terrific.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would agree. And just to say, you have to, those words mean lots of different things to lots of different people. So the challenge is making sure that everybody understands and agrees with achievable, relevant, time bound, objective, all those things don't really mean anything to me unless you discuss them as a team.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are at time, but James, I wanted to just check in and see if you had any final words you wanted to add to either of those questions or anything else we missed.
Yeah. There are recommendations to two really good books that I would recommend. So for receiving feedback, it's Old But Thanks for the Feedback by Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen. Is really good of understanding a lot of the things that Brian said about, how do you discern the quality of the feedback? There's something called the second score principle, which is really, really useful. And a book that I really love for giving feedback is Radical Candor by Kim Scott, especially from a leadership perspective. And there's some really good examples in there, really fun to read as well. And I think those are really good. And also, if you can look up Adam Grant, the organizational psychologist, and Andrew Huberman on YouTube, they have a good conversation around feedback and how you can have it be constructive.
Great, fantastic. Thank you so much for that, James. And so we are going to wrap up. Again, quick reminder, I might have mentioned it once or twice, but there's a group demo of Culture Plus coming up. But so please do sign up if you can, if you're interested, and you could join these wonderful, brilliant organizations who are building positive cultures. And we've got a great group of people already on Culture Plus and working with us. And finally, we would love to stay in touch. So please do subscribe. We've got some really interesting events coming up in the fall. From founder to leader, we've got manager workshops we're working on, and we know that you don't have the resource often to train your managers, so we're going to help with that. So please do subscribe so you can keep up to date on what's coming up. And thank you, as always, to my brilliant panelists, Brian, Marin, James. Thank you to Adnan for making sure that everything runs smoothly. And thank you to all of you for your time and attention for the last hour. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we hope to see you again soon.